The mechanics at the workshop gave up on the truck until an unemployed mechanic came up with a solution. The midday sun beat down like molten lead on the El Tornillo de Oro auto repair shop, located on the outskirts of Guadalajara, Jalisco. The air smelled of burnt oil and hot metal, while the sound of tools echoed off the sheet metal walls of the shop. It was a day like any other until that truck arrived. Roberto Fernandez, the shop owner, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag as he looked at the red Kangworth parked in the main bay. It had been towed from the highway to Tepic, where it had come to a sudden halt, leaving the driver, Don Sebastian, stranded with a load of avocados that had to reach Mexico City before dawn. "We've already checked everything, Don Sebastian," Roberto said with obvious frustration in his voice. "The engine won't start, but we can't find any faults in the electrical system, the fuel system, or the computer. It's as if the truck simply decided not to start." Don Sebastian, a 60-year-old man with a face weathered by the sun and years on the road, took off his Jalisco charro hat and wrung it in his hands. "Roberto, I've been driving for 30 years. This truck is my life, my livelihood. If I don't get that load there, I'll lose my contract with the distributor. 3 generations depend on my work. There has to be something you can do." 5 mechanics worked in the shop, each specializing in different areas. Javier, the youngest, was leaning over the engine with a multimeter in his hand. He had studied automotive mechanics at Conalep and was proud of his technical knowledge. "Boss, I've already checked the voltages," Javier said without looking up. "The alternator is working, the battery is charged, the fuses are fine. We even connected the diagnostic computer, and it's not throwing any error codes. It's as if the system is perfect, but the engine refuses to start." Marcos, a 50-year-old mechanic with hands as big as his heart, approached, wiping his hands with a red rag. "In my 30 years in the business, I've never seen anything like this," he admitted in a defeated tone. "I checked the fuel pump, the injectors, the glow plugs, the crankshaft sensor. Everything is in order. It's as if this truck is haunted." The word haunted made several mechanics discreetly cross themselves. In Mexico, especially in Jalisco, superstitions still carried weight, even among men of science and nuts and bolts. "Don't say that, Marcos," Roberto scolded him. "There's no witchcraft here, just mechanical failures that we haven't been able to identify." Don Sebastian sat on an old tire that served as a makeshift seat. His phone kept ringing. It was the distributor asking for his location. Each call was a reminder of the money he was losing by the minute. "How much longer do you need?" he asked wearily. Roberto looked at his team. They all had the same expression, frustration mixed with helplessness. They were good mechanics, some of the best in the area, but this truck had defeated them. "Don Sebastian, with all due respect, I think you need to call the agency. This problem is beyond our capabilities," Roberto admitted, and those words hurt him as if he were confessing a personal failure. The owner of the workshop had built his reputation over 20 years. The Golden Screw was known throughout the region for solving what others could not. Merchants, transporters, and individuals trusted him. But now, faced with this stubborn Kenworth, his pride was being crushed like an empty soda can. "The nearest dealership is in Zapopan," said Don Sebastian. "They'll charge me a fortune just to come and look at it, not counting the repair. And even then, there's no guarantee they'll fix it today. My cargo will spoil." Javier slammed the hood shut harder than necessary, expressing his frustration. "Boss, I'm really sorry, but this truck is like it has a life of its own and has decided not to cooperate." At that moment, the metal door of the workshop opened with a metallic squeak. The sunlight created a silhouette in the doorway. A thin man in his 40s walked in slowly. He was wearing worn jeans and a blue work shirt with old oil stains that no detergent could remove. His work boots were broken at the toes, revealing that they had seen better days. His face, marked by sun and worry, wore an expression of determination mixed with hope. "Good afternoon, Des," he said in a clear but humble voice. "I heard you have a problem with a truck." Roberto looked him up and down, not hiding his skepticism. "And you are?" "My name is Daniel Vargas," the man replied. "I was a diesel mechanic for 15 years in a transport fleet. I lost my job 6 months ago when the company closed. I've been looking for work ever since." Marcos let out a dry laugh. "Son, we have the best mechanics in the area here, and we haven't been able to fix it. We don't want to waste any more time. Daniel was unfazed by the rejection. He had heard that tone many times in recent months. Each rejection had been another stone in his path, but he kept walking. I'm just asking for a chance, Daniel insisted. Let me look at the truck. If I can't help, I'll leave without bothering you anymore. Don Sebastian stood up. There was something in that man's eyes that reminded him of himself 30 years ago. Hunger, not for food, but to prove his worth. Let him try, Roberto, said the trucker. What have we got to lose? Roberto sighed deeply. His pride told him to reject the stranger, but his pragmatism reminded him that they had no options. All right, he finally conceded, but you only have half an hour. After that, we'll have to call the agency. Daniel nodded with a slight smile. He approached the Kenworth as if it were an old friend. He placed his hand on the hot hood and closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The mechanics in the shop exchanged incredulous glances. This guy looked more like a faith healer than a mechanic, but there was something about his quiet confidence that made them stand and watch rather than openly mock him. Daniel opened the hood and began his inspection, not hurriedly, but with the calm of someone who knows exactly what to look for. Daniel Vargas leaned over the Kenworth's engine with a concentration that seemed to block out all the noise of the shop. His hands, weathered and marked by years of work, moved with precision over each component, as if he were reading a book written in metal and wires. The mechanics at El Tornillo de Oro watched from a safe distance, arms crossed and expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Roberto glanced at his watch at 2 p.m. The heat was unbearable and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. What is he doing? Javier Marcos whispered. He's touching the same things we already checked. He's wasting his time, Marcos replied in a low voice. He probably doesn't even know what to look for. Daniel could hear them, but he paid no attention. He had learned during his months of unemployment that other people's words only had the power he gave them. Instead, he focused all his energy on the truck in front of him. Don Sebastian approached Roberto with obvious concern on his face. Do you think he can fix it? He asked quietly. Roberto shrugged. Honestly, I don't know, but we've already tried everything we know. If he has a different idea, it's worth a shot. Daniel moved toward the truck's cab and sat down in the driver's seat. He turned the key in the ignition and listened carefully. The engine made a starting sound. It turned over, but it wouldn't start. It was as if it wanted to wake up, but something was keeping it asleep. The engine turns over, Daniel muttered to himself. It has battery, it has air, but something is missing. He got out of the truck and returned to the engine. This time his eyes focused on a specific area, the fuel delivery system. He had noticed something that the others had overlooked, not because they were bad mechanics, but because sometimes experience teaches you to see beyond the obvious. Do you have a flashlight? Daniel asked without looking up. Javier handed him an inspection lamp. Daniel turned it on and directed it toward the intake manifold, examining every connection, every hose, every sensor. His fingers touched, pressed gently, checked. Then he saw it. It was so small that it could easily have been mistaken for a shadow or a grease stain. There was a microscopic crack in the connection on the coolant temperature sensor. It wasn't enough to cause the sensor to stop working completely, but it was enough to send erratic readings to the engine computer. Here's the problem, Daniel announced in a calm but confident voice. Everyone quickly gathered around. Roberto leaned in to see where Daniel was pointing. The temperature sensor? Roberto asked incredulously. We already checked it. The computer didn't flag any fault codes. Exactly, Daniel replied. It didn't flag a code because technically the sensor is still working. But look here, he said, pointing to the crack with his finger. This tiny crack is letting air in. When the computer gets inconsistent temperature readings, it goes into protection mode. It won't start the engine because it thinks something is wrong, even though the values aren't abnormal enough to generate an error code. Marco scratched his head, processing the information. It's like when you have a fever, but not enough for the thermometer to register it as serious, but your body still feels bad, Marco said, trying to understand the analogy. Exactly, Daniel confirmed with a smile. It's an intermittent fault that only manifests itself under specific conditions. The truck was probably running fine until today's high temperatures exacerbated the problem. Javier moved closer, examining the connection with a magnifying glass. He's right, he admitted with surprise. There's the crack. It is so small we overlooked it. Roberto felt a mixture of relief and professional embarrassment. He had been so focused on looking for big, obvious faults that he had ignored the tiny details that sometimes cause the most frustrating problems. "Do you have a spare sensor?" Daniel asked. Roberto shook his head. "We would have to order it, and it would take at least 2 days to arrive." Daniel thought for a moment, evaluating his options. Then a smile spread across his face. "We don't need a new sensor yet. I can make a temporary repair that will last long enough for Don Sebastian to get to Mexico City. Once there, he can replace the sensor at any repair shop." "How?" asked Don Sebastian, his voice filled with renewed hope. Daniel went to his backpack, which he had left near the entrance to the workshop. From it, he took out a small personal toolbox, obviously old but well cared for. He took out a roll of self-fusing silicone tape and a small bottle of high-temperature sealant. "First, I'm going to clean the connection thoroughly," he explained as he worked. "Then I'll apply this high-temperature sealant to the crack. It's vibration-resistant and can withstand up to 200 degrees. Finally, I'll reinforce it with self-fusing tape to create an airtight seal." The mechanics watched in fascination as Daniel worked with surgical precision. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had made similar repairs hundreds of times. There was no doubt or hesitation in his movements. "This type of repair is not permanent," Daniel warned as he applied the sealant, "but it will last long enough for the trip. Don Sebastian, when you arrive in Mexico City, find a reliable repair shop and replace this sensor immediately. You don't want to risk it failing in the middle of another highway." Don Sebastian nodded vigorously. "I will, I promise. I just need to get there with my cargo." Daniel finished applying the self-fusing tape, making sure each layer fused perfectly with the one before it. Then he wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his pocket and headed for the truck's cab. "Fingers crossed," he said with a smile. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine turned once, twice, and on the third try roared to life with a powerful, steady sound. The characteristic purr of the diesel engine filled the workshop like music to the ears of everyone present. A silence of amazement fell over the group, followed immediately by an outburst of joy. Don Sebastian jumped off his makeshift tire seat and ran toward the truck cab with tears in his eyes. "It works! It works!" he shouted with a mixture of relief and gratitude that sprang from the depths of his being. Daniel turned off the engine after letting it run for a minute, checking for leaks and abnormal readings. He climbed down from the cab and was greeted with pats on the back and congratulations from all the mechanics, even those who had looked at him with skepticism just minutes before. Roberto approached Daniel and extended his hand. "I don't know what to say," Roberto admitted. "You humiliated me in the best possible way." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "It's not about humiliating anyone. We all have different knowledge. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what others overlook, especially when they've been searching for hours." Marcos approached with an embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry I doubted you, kid. You proved you know what you're talking about." "No problem," Daniel replied humbly. "I understand the skepticism. I would have reacted the same way." The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Guadalajara sky with shades of orange and pink that were reflected in the workshop windows. Don Sebastian personally checked every detail of his truck, making sure everything was ready for his trip to Mexico City. Daniel was putting his tools away in his backpack when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Roberto, looking at him with an expression that mixed respect and curiosity. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment?" asked the workshop owner. "Sure," replied Daniel, zipping up his backpack. Roberto led him to a small office at the back of the workshop. It was a modest space with a metal desk covered with invoices and work orders, a standing fan battling the heat, and a calendar from a parts store on the wall. Through a dirty window, he could see the work area where the other mechanics were chatting animatedly about what had happened. "Sit down," Roberto offered, pointing to a folding chair in front of the desk. Daniel sat down, unsure of what to expect. Roberto settled into his swivel chair, which creaked in protest, and clasped his hands on the desk. "Tell me your story," Roberto asked. "You said you lost your job 6 months ago. What happened?" Daniel took a deep breath. It was a painful story to tell, but he had grown accustomed to sharing it in interviews that had so far been fruitless. "I work for Transporte Hernandez, a family business in Guadalajara," Daniel began. "I started as a mechanic's assistant at the age of 25. For 15 years, I worked with their fleet of cargo trucks. I became the maintenance manager. We were a medium-sized company with 30 units. Roberto nodded, listening attentively. The owner, Don Carlos Hernandez, was a good man. Daniel continued nostalgically. He treated us like family, but 2 years ago he had a heart attack. His son, Gerardo, took over the business. Gerardo had other ideas about how to run things. Let me guess, Roberto interrupted. Cost cutting. Exactly, Daniel confirmed. He started cutting back on preventive maintenance to save money. I constantly warned him that we were compromising the safety of the units, but he only saw numbers on a spreadsheet. Eventually, one of the trucks had a major breakdown on the road because it hadn't had its scheduled maintenance. The driver was injured, though thankfully not seriously. Daniel paused, remembering that day clearly. I had documented all my maintenance recommendations and Gerardo's refusals. When the insurance company investigated the accident, I presented those documents. Gerardo fired me the next day, citing department restructuring. 3 months later, the company closed due to lawsuits and lost contracts. We all lost our jobs. Roberto Silva Bajo. That's a difficult situation, and you've been looking for work ever since. I've sent resumes to every transportation company and repair shop within a 100-mile radius, Daniel replied wearily. The problem is that many of them knew Gerardo or heard his side of the story. He painted me as a problematic and confrontational employee. No one wants to hire someone with that reputation. It doesn't matter how good you are at your but you kept trying, Roberto observed. What other choice do I have? Daniel asked with a sad smile. I have to pay rent. I have to eat. I've been doing odd jobs here and there, home repairs, whatever, but it's not enough. Today I was coming from an interview that didn't go well. I heard the mechanics talking about the truck while I was waiting for the bus outside, and I thought, maybe I can help. Maybe I can prove that I'm still worth something. Daniel's voice broke slightly on that last sentence, revealing the vulnerability he had been hiding for months. Roberto felt a lump in his throat. He knew all too well what it meant to struggle to keep a business afloat, to prove your worth in a competitive market. Daniel, Roberto said, leaning forward. I have a proposal for you. Daniel looked up with cautious hope in his eyes. I need a senior mechanic in my workshop, Roberto continued. Someone with experience in diesel engines. Someone who can see beyond the obvious. Today you prove that you are that someone. The salary won't be extraordinary at first, but it's honest and stable. You'll have basic benefits, and if it works out, we can talk about improvements in 3 months. Daniel was speechless for a moment. He had dreamed of hearing those words for so long that now he found it hard to believe them. Are you serious? He finally asked. Completely, Roberto replied firmly. Look, I'm a good mechanic and so are my guys, but today we've reached our limits. We need different perspectives, diverse experiences. You have something we don't have. I want you to be part of this team. Daniel felt his eyes fill with tears, but he held them back. He had cried enough in private over the last few months. Now it was time to celebrate. I don't know what to say, Daniel admitted. Yes, I accept. Thank you, Roberto. You won't regret it. Roberto extended his hand across the desk. Welcome to El Tornillo de Oro, Danielle. You start Monday at 7 a.m. Bring your tools and a strong desire to work. They shook hands firmly, sealing the deal. When they left the office, the other mechanics looked up. Roberto announced, Guys, meet Daniel Vargas, our new colleague. He'll be starting on Monday. There was a moment of surprise, followed by smiles and more pats on the back for Daniel. Even Marcos, who had been the most skeptical, approached with a genuine smile. Welcome to the team, Daniel. Looks like I'll have to work harder not to look ridiculous, Marcos joked. Javier, the youngest mechanic, approached enthusiastically. I hope to learn a lot from you, he said sincerely. I've never seen that diagnostic technique you used today before. Daniel smiled, feeling for the first time in months that he belonged somewhere. And I hope to learn from all of you, he replied. Every mechanic has their own set of skills. Together we can be unstoppable. Don Sebastian, who had been checking his load of avocados, approached the group, took out his wallet, and began counting bills. Daniel, this is for your service, he said, extending a considerable amount. Daniel raised his hands in refusal. No, Don Sebastian, I didn't fix your truck as a paid service. I did it because I needed to remind myself that I can still make a difference. Don Sebastian insisted. placing the bills in Daniel's hand. Then take it as a gift to celebrate your new Joe, he said firmly. Besides, you saved me from losing thousands of pesos in damaged cargo and an important contract. It's the least I can do. Daniel looked at the bills in his hand. It was more money than he had earned in weeks, enough to pay his overdue rent and buy decent food. Thank you, he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Don Sebastian gave him an affectionate pat on the shoulder. Thanks to you, young man. I'll replace that sensor as soon as I get to the capital, just as you told me. And if you ever need a recommendation or help, you have a friend here. They exchanged phone numbers before Don Sebastian climbed into his truck. The diesel engine roared to life again, loud and reliable. With a final wave out the window, the trucker pulled out of the workshop and onto the highway, carrying with him his precious cargo of avocados and a story he would undoubtedly tell many times. As the sun continued its descent, painting the sky with ever deeper colors, Daniel stood at the entrance to the workshop, watching the red Kenworth disappear into the distance. He felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Looks like your luck is changing, Roberto commented, standing next to him. It's not luck, Daniel replied. It's perseverance. I never stopped believing that things would get better. I just needed the right opportunity. Roberto smiled. Well, now you have it. What are you going to do this weekend before you start on Monday? Daniel thought for a moment. First, I'll pay my rent. Then I'll call my mom and give her the good news. She's been worried about me. And finally, I'll sleep without worries for the first time in months. Monday dawned with clear skies over Guadalajara. Daniel had arrived at El Tornillo de Oro workshop 15 minutes before 7 a.m., carrying his toolbox in a backpack with a change of clothes. Excitement and nerves mixed in his stomach as he walked toward the metal door, which was already open. Roberto was in his office reviewing the day's work orders. When he saw Daniel, he motioned for him to come over. Punctual. I like that, Roberto commented approvingly. Today will be an orientation day. I want you to learn how we operate here, our procedures, and familiarize yourself with the inventory and tools in the workshop. Perfect, Daniel replied. I'm ready. As the other mechanics arrived, they each greeted Daniel warmly. Marco showed him where he could store his personal tools and assigned him a locker. Javier gave him a tour of the workshop, explaining the system for organizing spare parts and tools. We're very strict about order here, Javier explained. Every tool has its place, and every spare part is cataloged. It may seem excessive, but when you're in the middle of an urgent repair, you don't want to waste time looking for what you need. Daniel was impressed by the level of organization. He had worked in places where chaos was the norm and knew how frustrating it could be. The first vehicle assigned to him was a 2015 Ford pickup truck that needed an oil change and a general checkup. It was a basic job, but Daniel approached it with the same attention to detail he would apply to any complex repair. As he drained the old oil, Marcos approached with a clipboard. We record everything here, he explained. Mileage, type of oil used, condition of the filter, any anomalies you observe. Customers appreciate these detailed reports. It gives them confidence in our work. That sounds great, Daniel commented as he wrote down the specifications. At my old job, we also kept meticulous records. It's the best way to catch problems before they become serious. Mid-morning, a delivery truck from a local bakery arrived. The driver, a burly man named Arturo, explained that the vehicle was making a strange noise in the front suspension. Roberto assigned the diagnosis to Daniel. Let's see what you find, Roberto said, watching from a distance. Daniel lifted the truck on the lift and began his inspection. He checked the shock absorbers, the steering terminals, the ball joints. Everything seemed to be in order, but the noise Arturo described was specific, a metallic knocking. When driving over potholes, Daniel lay down on his mechanic's trolley and slid under the vehicle, shining his lamp on each component. And there it was. The stabilizer bar had a rubber silent block bushing that was completely worn out. It was not visible to the naked eye because it was covered with accumulated dirt and grease. I found the problem, Daniel announced as he crawled out from under the vehicle. The stabilizer bar's silent block is destroyed, which is why it makes that noise when going over bumps. Roberto came over to verify that Daniel was right. The component was completely worn out, allowing the bar to move excessively. Good job, Roberto praised. It's easy to overlook those small components. Javier gets the replacement silent blocks so Daniel can complete the repair. While Daniel was working, several regular customers arrived at the shop with their vehicles. Roberto took every opportunity to introduce Daniel as the new member of the team, telling them, with Daniel's permission, the story of how he had solved the Kenworth problem that had baffled them all. The news spread quickly. By lunchtime, customers were already asking specifically for the new mechanic who had solved the impossible. Daniel felt overwhelmed by the attention, but also grateful during the meal they all shared together in a small outdoor rest area. Marcos shared a story about his early days in mechanics. When I started 30 years ago, there was no internet or diagnostic computers, Marcos said as he ate his carnitas tacos. Everything was knowledge passed down from master to apprentice and a lot of trial and error. I wrecked several engines before I learned how to do it right. Javier interjected. I had the advantage of studying at Conalep. We had books, manuals, even simulators. But when I got here, I realized that theory is only part of it. Real experience is irreplaceable. Daniel listened with interest, savoring the barbacoa tacos he had brought from a nearby stand. Each generation of mechanics faces different challenges, Daniel reflected. Vehicles used to be simpler mechanically, but they required more intuition. Now they are more complex electronically, but we have sophisticated diagnostic tools. The important thing is to combine technical knowledge with practical experience and never stop learning. Roberto nodded in agreement. Exactly. That's why I think our team is strong. We have Marcos's experience, Javier's up-to-date technical knowledge, and now your perspective on fleet maintenance. Daniel, together we cover a broad spectrum. In the afternoon, a case arrived that would test that collaboration. A 2018 Nissan Versa arrived with a complex electrical problem. The headlights were flashing intermittently, the air conditioning was randomly stopping, and the radio was resetting itself. This looks like one of those problems that takes us days to fix, Marcos commented with frustration. But Daniel suggested a systematic approach. Let's work on this together, Javier proposed. You have more experience with modern electrical systems. You can connect the scanner and see if there are any stored codes. Marcos, could you check all the ground connections? Sometimes a single loose ground point causes multiple electrical failures. I'll check the engine compartment wiring for rodent damage or wear. Roberto watched from his office, pleased to see Daniel naturally assume a coordinating role without being authoritarian. It was exactly the kind of collaborative leadership they needed. After 2 hours of teamwork, Marcos found the problem. A main ground wire hidden behind the dashboard had become loose due to constant vibrations. Once it was readjusted and secured properly, all the vehicle's systems worked perfectly. Teamwork, said Daniel, high-fiving Marcos and Javier. None of us would have found it so quickly working alone. At the end of the day, as they cleaned up the work area, Roberto called Daniel into his office. How did you feel today? Roberto asked. How at home? Daniel replied without hesitation. Everyone has been incredibly welcoming, and I love the team dynamic. There is mutual respect and open communication. I'm glad to hear it, Roberto said, because I have an additional proposal for you. Daniel raised an eyebrow curiously. I'm thinking of expanding our services to include preventive fleet maintenance, Roberto explained. There are many small businesses in the area with 4 or 5 vehicles that don't have a structured maintenance program. With your experience at Transportes Hernandez, you could head up that department, not immediately, but perhaps in a few months, once you're fully integrated. Daniel felt a surge of enthusiasm. I'd love to. Preventive maintenance is one of my passions. I know firsthand how much money and headaches it can save companies. Perfect, Roberto said with a smile. Then let's work toward that. For now, continue learning our processes and building relationships with the team. When the time comes, you'll be ready. That night when Daniel left the workshop, he felt lighter than he had in months. Not only did he have a stable job, but he also had a vision for the future, a path for growth. As he walked to the bus stop, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, Daniel Vargas answered. This is Sebastian, the one with the Kenworth, said a familiar voice. I wanted to let you know that I arrived in Mexico City without any problems and delivered my cargo on time. I replaced the sensor just like you told me to. The truck is running great. I just wanted to thank you again. Daniel smiled broadly. I'm so glad to hear that, Don Sebastian. Take care of yourself and your truck. You too, kid. And you know, if you ever need anything, you can count on me. After hanging up, Daniel looked up at the starry sky over Guadalajara. He had gone from despair to optimism in a matter of days, and all because he had dared to offer his help when no one else had any solutions. Sometimes, he thought, life rewards you not for being the strongest or the smartest, but for being persistent and willing to act when the opportunity arises. 3 months had passed since Daniel joined the El Tornillo de Oro team. In that time, the workshop had undergone remarkable changes. Daniel's reputation as an expert diagnostician had spread rapidly throughout the community of local transporters and businesses, and what began as rumors of the mechanic who solved the impossible turned into a solid base of customers who trusted his expertise. It was a Friday afternoon when Roberto called the entire team to a meeting in the break area, which was unusual, as meetings were usually informal and on the fly. The mechanics looked at each other curiously as they settled into folding chairs under the shade of a mango tree. "Well, guys," Roberto began, with a smile he couldn't hide, "I've gathered you here because I have some good news to share. As you all know, these last 3 months have been exceptional for the shop. We have increased our customer base by 40%, and not only in quantity, but also in quality. Companies that used to go to the competition now come to us." Marcos whistled in approval. "That's what we call growth," he commented. "Exactly," Roberto continued. "And much of that success is due to Daniel and his proposal for a preventive maintenance program for fleets. So I want to make an official announcement. We have signed contracts with 3 local companies for the maintenance of their vehicles. In total, there are 23 units that we will be monitoring monthly." Spontaneous applause arose from the group. Javier gave Daniel an enthusiastic pat on the back. "That's incredible, brother," Javier exclaimed. "You took your idea from scratch to sign contracts in 3 months." Daniel smiled humbly. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone contributed. Marcos taught me about the specifics of the light utility vehicles these companies use. Javier helped me create the electronic inspection protocols. Roberto invested time and resources in promoting the service. It was teamwork, but you had the vision," Roberto insisted. "And speaking of that, I also want to announce that Daniel will officially be the supervisor of the preventive maintenance department. He will have autonomy to organize schedules, assign tasks, and make operational decisions for that department." The announcement surprised Daniel. They knew they were working toward that goal, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon. "Roberto, I don't know what to say," Daniel stammered. "Say you accept," Roberto replied with a smile, "because I already had business cards made with your new title." Everyone laughed. Daniel gratefully accepted, feeling that he had finally regained not only a job, but also his professional dignity and purpose. The meeting continued with Roberto explaining how the work would be reorganized. They would hire 2 more assistants to handle the additional workload, and Daniel would be free to train them according to the standards he had established. "One more thing," Roberto added. "Next month, we will have a visit from the local Chamber of Commerce. They are doing an article on successful small businesses in Guadalajara, and El Tornillo de Oro was selected. They will want to interview all of us, especially you, Daniel, about the preventive maintenance program." That night, the entire team went out to celebrate at a popular taco restaurant in downtown Guadalajara. Under the colored lights and the characteristic bustle of a Friday night, they shared stories, laughter, and a genuine camaraderie that went beyond the working relationship. Marcos raised his beer in a toast to Daniel, who showed us that we should never underestimate someone based on first impressions. "And to all of you," Daniel responded by raising his own beer, "who gave me a chance when no one else did. You changed my life." The toast was followed by a chorus of cheers that attracted curious glances from neighboring tables. Javier, who had had a little too much to drink, became sentimental. "You know what, Daniel? When you walked in that day, I thought you were just another desperate guy looking for a job. But you taught me something important. Desperation and determination are 2 different things. You were determined, not desperate. There's a huge difference." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Desperation makes you act out of panic. Determination makes you act with purpose. I learned that during my months of unemployment. Every rejection was an opportunity to refine my approach, to learn what didn't work and what did." Roberto, who had been listening to the conversation, chimed in. "Do you know what convinced me to give you the job that day? It wasn't just that you solved the Kenworth problem. It was your humility. You didn't brag. You didn't mock us for not seeing it. You just did your job and recognized that we all had something to offer. That's true professionalism. The conversation drifted to stories from the past. Marcos told about his early years as an apprentice when he made the mistake of draining the transmission oil instead of the engine oil in the city mayor's car. My teacher almost killed me that day, Marcos recalled with a laugh. But instead of firing me, he made me clean the entire shop for a week while I memorized the service manual. I learned my lesson. Attention to detail is not optional, it is mandatory. Javier shared his experience of when he first left Conalep, convinced that he knew everything about mechanics, only to realize in his first real job that theory and practice were completely different worlds. It took me a whole year to stop being a know-it-all and become a genuine apprentice, Javier admitted. Humility is the basis of continuous learning. As the night wore on and the group's energy began to wane, they set off on their way back. Roberto offered to drive Daniel home. During the ride in Roberto's truck through the brightly lit streets of Guadalajara, they had a more serious conversation. Daniel, I want to ask you something, Roberto said as he drove. Did you ever consider seeking revenge against Gerardo Hernandez? He ruined your reputation and cost you months of suffering. Daniel looked out the window at the city lights rushing by. At first, yes, he admitted, I was furious. I wanted everyone to know the truth, that he was responsible for the company's downfall. Not me. But then I realized something. Revenge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I was only hurting myself with that resentment. So you let it go? Roberto asked. It wasn't that simple, Daniel replied. I had to actively work on forgiving, not for him, but for me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or justifying what he did. It means freeing myself from the burden of hatred I was carrying. Besides, eventually the truth came out. The people who matter now know my side of the story. That's enough for me, Roberto nodded respectfully. That's a mature perspective. Many in your situation would have become permanently bitter. I almost did, Daniel confessed. But my mom said something that changed my way of thinking. She said, son, you can build a future or you can live in the past, but you can't do both at the same time. I decided to build a future. They arrived at Daniel's modest home in a working-class neighborhood of Guadalajara. Before getting out, Roberto handed him an envelope. What's this? Daniel asked. Your bonus for the contracts you secured, Roberto explained. It's a percentage of the additional revenue you generated. If we're going to do this preventive maintenance department thing right, you need to be incentivized by results. Daniel opened the envelope and his eyes widened in surprise. It was a significant amount, more than he had expected. Roberto, this is too generous, Daniel protested. It's only fair, Roberto corrected. You earned it. Did it wisely. That night, as Daniel prepared for bed in his small apartment, he reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken. Just 3 months ago, he had been on the verge of despair, questioning his worth and his future. Now he had not only a job, but a growing career, a team that respected him, and the satisfaction of knowing that his skills were making a real difference. He thought of all the people he had met during his journey. Don Sebastian, whose confidence in him had been the first step. Roberto, who had seen beyond appearances. Marcos and Javier, who had accepted him as an equal. And all the clients who now trusted his expertise. But more importantly, he thought about himself. He had rediscovered his own worth, not through external validation, but through persistence, humility, and a willingness to keep trying even when it seemed impossible. On Sunday, Daniel visited his mother as he had promised. She lived in a modest house in Tlaquepaque, decorated with plants and family photographs she had collected over decades. My son, you look different, his mother observed as she served him homemade pozole. There's light in your eyes again. Daniel told her about his promotion, the contracts, and the bonus. His mother cried with joy, hugging him tightly. I always knew you would make it, she said. You have your father's spirit. He never gave up either. Daniel's father had passed away 10 years ago, but his memory remained a motivating force in Daniel's life. He had been a mechanic too, one who worked long hours to give his family a decent life. Mom, Daniel said, I want you to take this. He handed her half of the bonus money. I know you've been struggling with medical bills. This should help. His mother protested, but Daniel insisted, "Please let me do this. For months you supported me financially when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Finally, she accepted, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I raised a good man," she said. "Your father would be proud." The following Monday, Daniel arrived early at the shop to begin formally structuring his new department. He had spent Sunday creating protocols, checklists, and schedules. When the other mechanics arrived, they found Daniel in the office surrounded by papers and with a laptop open. "You started without us," Javier joked. "I had to take advantage of the enthusiasm," Daniel replied with a smile. "But I need your input on this. Come on in. Let me show you what I'm planning." Over the next hour, Daniel presented his vision for the department. He had created a customized inspection point system for each type of vehicle, customer communication protocols, and tracking software that would automatically alert when a vehicle needed service based on mileage or time. "This is impressive," Marcos commented as he reviewed the documents. "It's very professional and necessary," Daniel added. "If we're going to manage multiple fleets, we need systems that don't rely on human memory. Technology should be our ally, not our enemy." Roberto, who had been listening from the doorway, entered with an expression of paternal pride. "Daniel, this exceeds any expectations I had. You're building something solid here." The following weeks were intense but rewarding. The two new assistants, Miguel and Carlos, were hired, and Daniel devoted himself to training them personally. He taught them not only technical skills, but also the service philosophy he considered fundamental: attention to detail, honesty with customers, and continuous learning. "Mechanics isn't just about fixing what's broken," Daniel told them during the training sessions. "It's about preventing things from breaking in the first place. And when something inevitably does go wrong, it's about explaining to the customer what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent it from happening again." Preventive maintenance contracts quickly began to pay off. One of the client companies, a dairy product distributor, reported a 30% reduction in repair costs after only 2 months of the program. Another company that handled courier services saw an increase in the availability of its fleet from 85% to 97%. These tangible results did not go unnoticed. More companies began to inquire about preventive maintenance services. The workshop phone rang constantly with inquiries. When the day of the interview with the Chamber of Commerce arrived, Daniel was nervous but prepared. The reporter, a young woman named Patricia, arrived with a photographer, and they spent the entire morning at the workshop. "Tell me your story, Daniel," Patricia asked with her tape recorder on. "How did you go from being unemployed to running a department in 3 months?" Daniel shared his story honestly, without hiding the struggles or embellishing the achievements. He talked about the importance of persistence, the humility to accept help, and the value of demonstrating skills rather than just talking about them. "What made El Tornillo de Oro workshop different," Daniel explained, "was that Roberto gave me the opportunity to show what I could do rather than judging me solely on my resume. In an increasingly automated job market, where algorithms weed out candidates before a human even sees them, that opportunity to demonstrate real value is invaluable." The interview also featured Roberto, who spoke about the importance of seeing potential in people and building diverse teams with different strengths. "Daniel brought something none of us had," Roberto said, "but instead of threatening us, he elevated us. A good leader is not afraid to hire people who are more capable than himself. He embraces it because a strong team makes everyone shine brighter." The article was published 2 weeks later in the Chamber of Commerce magazine and was also shared on their social media. The headline read, "From Unemployed to Leader, the story of resilience that inspires small businesses in Guadalajara." The response was overwhelming. The workshop received dozens of calls, not only from potential customers, but also from unemployed people seeking advice. Daniel spent time each week meeting with some of them, sharing his experience and offering guidance. "I can't give everyone a job," he told them, "but I can share what I've learned. Never underestimate the power of keeping at it. A single opportunity can change everything." 6 months after his first day at Golden Bolt, Daniel was overseeing a preventive maintenance operation that now included 8 client companies and more than 60 vehicles. He had hired 4 more assistants and was in talks to open a second service bay dedicated exclusively to preventive maintenance. One day, while reviewing the maintenance schedule, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Daniel Vargas?" asked a familiar voice, but one he couldn't place. Yes, it's me. Who am I speaking to? It's Gerardo Hernandez. Daniel felt his heart stop for a moment. The name of the person who had caused so much pain in his life took a moment to take a deep breath before responding. Gerardo, what a surprise. Daniel, I read the article about you in the Chamber of Commerce magazine, said Gerardo, his voice heavy with discomfort. I wanted to call you because I owe you an apology. Daniel remained silent, letting Gerardo continue. When I fired the company and you, I was blinded by pride. I didn't want to admit that my decisions had caused problems. It was easier to blame you than to face my own incompetence. I destroyed something my father had built over decades and dragged good people, including you, down with me. I am deeply sorry. Daniel felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, satisfaction at being vindicated, but also, to his own surprise, compassion. Gerardo, I appreciate the apology, Daniel replied after a moment. I know it wasn't easy to make this call. It wasn't, Gerardo admitted. I've been in therapy trying to deal with everything that happened. Part of my recovery process involves making amends with the people I hurt. You were at the top of that list. What are you doing now? Daniel asked, genuinely curious. I work at a logistics company, entry-level position. It's humiliating after having been the boss, but I guess it's what I deserve. I'm learning the business from the bottom up, as I should have done from the beginning. Daniel thought for a moment before speaking. Gerardo, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. The fact that you're working to improve says a lot. I wish you the best. Thanks, Daniel. That means more than you know, Gerardo said, his voice breaking. I see you've built something incredible. You were always the best mechanic I ever had, and I was an idiot for not recognizing it. After hanging up, Daniel sat for a moment processing the conversation. He felt no triumph or satisfaction at Gerardo's downfall. Instead, he felt something closer to peace. The circle had been closed. That afternoon, Daniel gathered his preventive maintenance department team. I want to thank you all, he began. A year ago, I was at the lowest point in my professional life. Today, thanks to you and the support of this workshop, we are doing work that is making a real difference for businesses in our community. But more importantly, we are proving that with teamwork, innovation, and a commitment to excellence, small businesses can compete and succeed. Miguel, one of the newest attendees, raised his hand. Daniel, many of us are here because we followed your example. You inspired us not to give up when things get tough. Thank you for being that kind of leader. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had completed a journey of transformation, from being someone who needed inspiration to someone who provided it. That night, Daniel left the workshop with a deep sense of satisfaction. The streets of Guadalajara were lit by the city lights and the last glow of sunset. He walked instead of taking the bus, needing time to reflect. He thought about all the lessons he had learned, that value does not come from titles or positions, but from the contributions you make, that humility and competence are not contradictory, but complementary, that opportunities often come disguised as impossible challenges, and that true success is not only personal, but shared with those who helped you along the way. Arriving at his apartment, which he could now afford to furnish properly, Daniel sat on his small balcony with a cup of coffee, watched the stars begin to appear in the night sky, and smiled. His phone vibrated with a message. It was from Don Sebastian, the Kenworth trucker. Hi, Daniel. I was passing through Guadalajara and thought I'd stop by to say hello tomorrow. Do you have time? I have a business proposal that might interest you. Daniel replied affirmatively, curious about what it might be, but that was a story for another day. For now, it was enough to sit in the tranquility of his home, knowing that he had not only transformed his life, but also positively impacted the lives of many others. The road from despair to purpose had been long and difficult, but every step was worth it. Daniel had learned that sometimes the best opportunities come when you are willing to help without expecting anything in return, when you prove your worth through actions rather than words, and when you never, ever give up, even when all seems lost. As the stars shone over Guadalajara, Daniel closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for people who believe in you, and for the transformative power of persistence combined with humility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new stories to write. But tonight, Daniel simply enjoyed the present, knowing that he had gained something more valuable than money or status. He had regained his dignity, his purpose, and his faith that hard work and integrity still means something in this world. And in a small mechanic's shop called El Tornillo de Oro on the outskirts of Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Those lessons would continue to inspire every person who walked through its doors, seeking not only to repair their vehicles, but also to remember that at the heart of every impossible problem lies a solution waiting to be discovered by someone determined enough to find it. M.